as we get into a few more minutes. But just by very quick intro, thank you very much to Ariel Willenau for joining us to speak about how blockchain is being used to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Ariel's spoken at a few of our Crypto Curry Club events with great popularity. He's been the man working on or behind some of the greatest blockchain projects, working with Deutsche Telekom and IBM and Lloyds of London, amongst others, and is well, the founder of FinServe Experts, and is now partnered with Blok Bioscience, is that correct, to work on a solution for blockchain to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. So very grateful to Ariel for joining us and speaking with us today. Just a few points. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So at any time, if anyone's got a question for Ariel, if you scroll down towards the bottom of your screen, there's a black bar with a Q&A function on the right-hand side. Anyone can at any stage ask any questions in there. I'll be keeping an eye on those. We'll let Ariel speak undisturbed, but I'll be going through those questions, and then at the end we'll ask those to Ariel to make sure that as many people as possible get all of their questions answered. So at any stage, anyone can type in questions in there and I will get through to them, even if not straight away at the time. We'll let Ariel speak undisturbed until there's a natural pause or a natural end. Just also thank you very much to Diamond HubSpot partner BabelQuest. They've been helping us host all of our webinars and set up the technology for us and record them for us, and have lent us their operations manager, Laura, who's here to help out with the running of these webinars and transferring all our events from in-person events to digital events, and building us a new website and helping us with our newsletters as well. So very grateful to BabelQuest, who are just helping us off their own back to run these digital events and lend us their team to help out. So thank you very much to BabelQuest. And Ariel, over to you, and I'll be keeping an eye on the questions and we'll get to those as you finish.
All right, thanks very much, Erica. Sound check, can everybody hear loud and clear, and can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Erica, thanks for having me. And it's been a wild ride. Those of you who know, I left IBM about 4 years ago now to start my own consulting firm, FinServe Experts, and beginning of this year started talking about partnering with Blok Solutions to work on a number of problems that both Blok and we were passionate about. Central bank digital currency being one example, helping people out of the revolving credit trap with a very promising UK fintech called Finexos being another. But when COVID hit, we realized that we had the right combination of platform delivery expertise, supply chain expertise, and medical expertise that we had not only the privilege, but the obligation to step in and do something. So we've been working on this since late January, early February, and it's now stable enough that we feel that it's the appropriate time to start talking about it and to share what we've got going and what we're doing with it. This isn't so much a sales pitch, though, but it's more talking about the capability and our reaction to some of the same things that you've been reading in the press, being released by governments around the world, and so forth. So, with that being said, let's dig in. Managing this COVID is hard. People who run governments and major enterprises around the world are used to dealing with difficult questions and hard issues. But the questions we're dealing with now are coming from so many different directions, and there isn't any information or any data. To use an example, when people are talking about immunity and whether the IgG antibody grants immunity, you've heard the WHO say, "Oh, we don't know if it does." And of course, when the press gets a hold of that, they say, well, okay, so we're not sure. And there were some cases in South Korea about people who appear to have been reinfected. And this generates a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And the reality, though, is that when the medical community says something like, or uses the word immunity or protection, that opinion is based typically on years of research. And they won't use that word unless they're really sure they know what it means. If those of you who were around when AIDS first emerged into world awareness in the 1980s, there was a debate of several years, quite an acrimonious debate about whether or not the HIV virus actually was the cause of AIDS. And people who questioned that were pilloried in the press for exhibiting what was otherwise an acceptable level of scientific rigor. So there's no reason to expect that somebody would have the answer for a virus whose existence is less than a year old. So it's not surprising that the medical community is not willing to use the word immunity, or that the WHO would warn us that an immunity passport is not a guarantee of immunity. Of course it isn't. We don't have the science yet. We have to make the best decisions based on the data we've got. The other thing that's hard is that various people, and I'm not talking just about two people in the back of their garage, major enterprises, brilliant innovators, very successful entrepreneurs have all put forward solutions. And somebody says, well, the answer is contact trace. The answer is testing. And the debate that rages is in many ways a false dichotomy and causes a lot of unnecessary friction. In our view, that the answer is actually an entire ecosystem. And any one of the pieces of this ecosystem is worthless without the others. So going through, the first thing, I guess, is discussing that ecosystem. An immunity passport is a certifiable and, in our opinion, self-sovereign record of somebody's antibody immunization symptom status. It's data that they own themselves that can be used to validate and to determine whether or not, for instance, somebody can return to work, somebody can enter a plane, somebody can go to a bar or a restaurant. For that to have any value, though, again, it would be worthless if you weren't able to put onto that passport some test results. So great, you've got a self-sovereign record with nothing on it, unless you have testing. So the test results are another key part of the ecosystem required to manage COVID-19. So you have to be able to test at scale. So we're talking about entire workforces. We're talking about the population of entire countries. Without that test information, having a passport doesn't do any good. Okay? The notion of testing doesn't make sense unless you can actually supply those tests. Most of the tests today, not all of them, but most of them, come from China. That's true because China has the majority of the world's manufacturing capacity in general, and it's doubly true because China was the first place that had to deal with COVID. The Chinese government so far has had a record of flipping on and off the ability of the Chinese companies to export. And even when they theoretically have the ability to export, the Chinese government has made it clear that they have first call on the manufacturing capacity of Chinese companies when they need it. I don't expect any other major country would do any differently. They would look after their own citizens first. And then finally, you have the question of guidance and contact trace. Right now, most people are getting their guidance from social media, from sharing articles that people read in reputable and less reputable journalistic sites. And it's very, very difficult for the government to issue guidance in a reliable way. And even when it can, the guidance is often far more complex than most people can handle. Witness Boris Johnson's recent attempt to try and put in place a multi-staged alert system. Mostly it generated confusion. I probably, though not the biggest fan of Boris Johnson, have a lot of sympathy because the rules are complex. And to expect to put this into a mass media message is daunting, to say the least. The last piece of the ecosystem then is having all this data, having all the passport, the testing, being able to produce the tests and the guidance, is the question of how do you get that guidance to people, and how do you make the right decisions as decision makers about when to open bars, when to open hotels, how many people let onto public transport, where are the tests going, what areas don't have enough tests. Okay, if there's a batch of tests that prove unreliable, how do you find where other tests from that same batch are and make sure that people aren't using it to make the wrong decisions? What kind of tests do you give? Which kinds are accurate? Which kinds are not accurate? What are the various purposes? All of these questions are things that have to be juggled. So the answer has to be an ecosystem. So what we've tried to do is put in place a framework that's not only a technology platform, but that full ecosystem. So that's, so I want to walk through what the pieces of that ecosystem are. And because this is the crypto curry, also to talk about where blockchain plays a role. There is nothing that, that's part of this ecosystem that you couldn't do with traditional technologies. Okay, that's absolutely clear. Blockchain provides shared records. There is messaging and synchronization that could do that. Blockchain provides immutability. You can make a traditional database immutable as well. The reason blockchain is very, very useful is because a lot of the problems that people have been trying to solve with blockchain for the past 3 or 4 years are exactly some of the problems that we face in delivering this ecosystem. So we can leverage a lot of the work that's been done in the blockchain industry around supply chain, around self-sovereign ID, and get a leg up and deliver something very fast. And delivering something very fast is really what we need right now. So to that being said, because we need to go so fast, there's a limit on how much we want to innovate. I am normally a big fan of doing new things, of doing things that haven't been done before. It's what motivates me. It's what makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. But in this case, we need to deliver something that works, and we need to deliver it so fast that one of the decisions we made very early is we weren't going to try anything that had been done before in at least some level of success out in the world. So we need to be able to query data without actually sharing that data. So we don't create a centralized database that the government can use to create a surveillance state. So for that example, we actually looked at a solution that the government of British Columbia used to let people into bars. They had a serious problem several years back where bouncers at bars and clubs who were letting young women into those clubs were just reading the data off of their driver's license and stalking them. So, to get into a club, somebody would have to show their driver's license or some other ID, and the bouncer at the door could see their name, their address, their age, all of this very personal information. So what the government did is they piloted a program that put an app on people's phone where the app could show an attestation of your status, and all the bouncer needed to see with this app was, should you let the person in the door or not? So they just, it was a very simple app that when you tried to go into an establishment where alcohol was being served, all the bouncer saw on their app was a green check or a red X. They don't need to, they don't need to actually know any of the details like your name or where you live. They just need to know whether to let you in the club. So we use some of the design thinking around that. Self-sovereign identity and being able to make decisions. We also looked at a pilot that the government of Canada did with the government of Denmark, where they actually used self-sovereign ID to make immigration decisions in the same way, where you would not necessarily have to show your passport or share other identifying information for somebody in an airline or in a border control to decide whether to let you in the country. With analytics and using machine learning, we took a page from what IBM has done with Watson around diagnostic assistance. So in this instance, what you can't do is replace doctors for many, many reasons, but one of the key ones is accountability. A doctor may use a computer to aid them in research, but the responsibility for making a diagnosis has to remain with the doctor. Well, you've got an artificial intelligence program called Watson that IBM runs that can do research on symptoms at a scale that a single individual, however talented or gifted, could never do. So a doctor being faced with a set of novel symptoms that they did not know how to diagnose could receive suggestions from Watson on what the case might be. And the suggestion will be based on reading thousands and thousands of journal articles, more than any one physician could read in their lifetime. They don't replace the physician, but they provide the physician data that they could never get on their own to make better decisions. And then finally, in the case of provenance, being able to understand where the testing machines for the labs and the test kits for the homes are coming from, we took a page from Everledger, which is a UK-based startup that had the first real blockchain production solution, which is tracing the provenance of diamonds from mine all the way to ring, helping track down diamond smuggling, forgery with simulated diamonds, theft, blood diamonds, etc., by having a secure supply chain all the way through. So every piece of this ecosystem that we're putting together, or indeed that anyone should put together, to my mind, if you're going to go as fast as we're going now, there have to be these kind of reference points, or it's just too risky. So talking about the principal actors in this ecosystem, we start with the member, which is the person you care about. And we use the term member because it's generic. Governments will care about their citizens. Large enterprises will care about their employees. Hospitality will care about their guests. Transport entities will care about their travelers. Okay, so member is the generic term for somebody, somebody who is engaging with the organization, the org, that is putting this ecosystem in place. The agents are the people who are making the decision, at the coalface. These are the people who are saying, should I let this person on the train? Should I let this person into the bar? Can I let this person return to work? They're also the medical care professionals that are doing the testing. So anyone who's interacting with the members is an agent. So in the case of an enterprise, agents are often employees or contractors of the organization. In the case of a government, they might be government employees, but they also might be empowered people from private industry. So for instance, here in the UK, every year when you go to get an influenza immunization, you typically go to a large UK drugstore called Boots, or chemist, the term they use here, called Boots. And you have them, and they will give you a flu vaccination right there in the drugstore. So the Boots employee at this case would be the agent. And then finally, ourselves, Blok, as the solution provider, have work to do to offer up the capabilities to these actors. So let's dig in and talk about what I think is the most important problem to solve, which is how to get people tested. So what I'm sharing with you is a recent view of a testing protocol. I'll say a couple things about this. First of all is that it's simplified in that there's a lot of other exception loops in here. And the second is that it's already wrong. This This protocol is perhaps 4 days old, and we've already learned more since then. So the ecosystem has to take account of the fact that these protocols have been changing on a weekly and in some cases a daily basis, and they will continue to do so as our medical science evolves. And it's evolving very quickly, and we're learning a lot as we go. So I'm going to walk you through this just to give you as an example. So this is no longer correct, so please don't take this as gospel. So the starting point for the protocol, we believe, is the rapid test, which is the test that you do with a finger prick at home, which tests for the antibodies. You'll have heard a lot in the press that these tests aren't very accurate, and that's correct. They aren't. They are, the worst ones are 70% accurate, and the best ones are in the low 90s. So far, they are improving. That is not accurate enough to use for diagnostic purposes. You can't make a decision to treat somebody and put their life at risk with 90% accuracy. You can, however, do a couple really, really useful things, even with 70% accuracy. A 70% accurate test is plenty accurate enough for epidemiology. If you want to track the outbreak, if you want to find hot spots of infection, 70% is plenty for any decent statistical algorithm to say, look, this is where we are experiencing an outbreak. This is where hundreds of people are getting infected. So with home screening, we can rush ventilators, medical care people, further tests to a spot where an outbreak is concerned. And that's with a fairly low accuracy test. The other place where the rapid test is absolutely key is in the treatment of COVID. So what happens when people do catch it and they are at risk and they end up in the ICU on a ventilator? So far, the best medical science says that the best treatment we have right now is blood serum. You give somebody who is critically ill, somebody who's at risk of dying, a transfusion of serum from the blood of somebody who has already survived the disease and carries the antibodies. And those antibodies will go to work. They often don't completely cure, but they lessen the symptoms to the point where your body can do its job of fighting the virus. And blood serum so far is the best treatment. The rapid test is a great first screen at finding potential blood donors. So it plays an absolutely key role in the ecosystem, even though it's not that accurate. So if somebody performs the rapid test and they test positive, the next thing you want to do, okay, is get them a more accurate test. So the more accurate tests are lab tests to date. They can be done with blood samples, and in some cases, they can be done with sputum. This is the PCR test that you get with a swab at the back of your nose or your back of your throat. These tests are much more accurate. They are accurate enough for diagnostic purposes. The one we're currently using, which is manufactured by a company called Wilo, is 99.2% accurate. Okay, and we have a secure supply chain for those, but they will never approach the scale that you can get with the rapid home test. So you need to decide, you need to triage. You need to decide who to give the accurate tests to. And so our view is that you give the tests to somebody who has tested positive for the antibody. And if they are a key worker, if they're working in a hospital or with the police, you get them tested right away. Otherwise, you can confirm that they are clear of symptoms for 7 days, and then you test them, okay? If somebody runs through the high accuracy lab test and they carry the IgG antibody and they've been clear of symptoms for 7 days, they are likely immune to COVID-19, okay? Likely is all we can say. As I said, immunity is a word that the medical community will use after years of research. Likely immune is the best we're going to do right now, okay? If the infection is confirmed or if they remain at risk, then they stay home. If somebody tests negative for the antibodies, again, you check for symptoms at home And if they start showing symptoms, you then review, and you can actively track, and you can possibly treat. Okay. If somebody gets very sick, they can go to the hospital. If they remain symptom-free for a period of time, then they are eligible for many of the PPE-related return to work protocols. So far, only a small number of percentage of people are going to have the antibodies, or indeed to get COVID. Less than 5% in most countries, even the countries with the most serious outbreaks. We can't keep 95% of our workforce at home forever. That's just not sustainable. So we have to have protocols that allow people who have tested negative and have had no symptoms to return to work somehow. So the protocol supports that. Anyway, so that's a recent protocol. It's not the most current one, and if I gave you the most current one today, it wouldn't be the right one by the end of the week. This is just an example of what we're using to design a platform that allows for rapidly changing protocols. Let's go on then to talk about the immunity passport, and this is probably one of the areas where the technology is one of the biggest contributors. It's very, very difficult to give the medical community, to give researchers, and to give government decision makers the ability they need to make decisions without compromising people's privacy. But it isn't impossible. And drawing on some of the experiences from the government of British Columbia, government of Canada, some of the work that's being done in Europe, there is a way to do it, and we've done it. The way to do this is to create an application where any personal information stays on your mobile device and never leaves it. So how does that work, and how can how can people make the necessary inferences? So I want to walk you through the way the Immunity Passport works, and I'll start with how you sign up for it, because that'll explain it, I think, a little bit better. When you first download an Immunity Passport app, you use that app to take a selfie of yourself and a picture of a government accepted ID. The photo of that ID remains on your phone. It is physically impossible. There is no API. There is no way for the app to query the phone to get that information. You then take the selfie and the picture of your ID to an agent, to a human being, to get attested. What that agent does is they look at your physical ID, which you bring with you. They look at the selfie you took. They look at the picture of the ID on your phone, and they look at you in person. They look at your face, and they attest that all four of the same things, all four, the selfie, your physical self, your ID, and your picture of your ID are the same person. And they record you as attested. Once you are attested, you can then do everything else, okay? That attestation is linked to your physical device. It is linked to your photograph. And at no point in that conversation or in that interaction has the agent even recorded your name. When you sign up for this application, you don't enter your name. We don't know your name. We don't need to know your name to do this, okay? The only identifying information is the picture of your passport, and that never leaves your phone. The attesting agent looks at it once, and nobody ever sees it again. So once you're attested, let's say you go to or you receive a rapid home kit in your home. You can test that and you can upload it. And that test result, again, it sits on your phone. It never leaves the phone. There is no way to get it off your phone. Let's say you go to get a blood test because you've tested positive for the IgG antibody and you are symptom-free, you are potentially immune. So you want to go get a lab test to confirm your likely immunity. You go to a doctor or a nurse or a phlebotomist to give blood. They will have the agent app, which scans a QR code on your app, okay? So the first thing that happens after that the agent scans your QR code is that you get a data consent message. And you can see an example of one of those consent messages on the right-hand side of the screen. So before anything else happens, you are giving consent for your data to be shared. You still aren't sharing your passport information. You still aren't even sharing your name. You're just giving consent to share the results of the test so that the government or your employer can make a decision about letting you back to work. Okay? You're not sharing any identifying information, just the test result. Okay? You give that consent, and then the person doing the test, they see a picture, they see the selfie. They don't see the passport, they don't see your name, they just see the selfie. And the agent is asked, is the person in the selfie the person in front of you? Yes or no? Okay, they say yes, and then they can do the test. That's it. At no point has any identifying information changed hands. They do the test, they take blood, the blood is sent to a lab, okay, and then you receive your results back on the app. At no point have we recorded anything about you. So the idea is that this immunity passport is your record, okay? And the tests you get and the symptoms you record are like visa stamps in a passport. It stays in your possession. They own, so you as an individual own and control your own data, and it never leaves the phone. It is impossible. So when we roll this out in production, we will have an independent auditor come and actually walk through the code and confirm what we're saying. That no, there is no way to get any of this data off the phone ever. There is no central database of your test results or of any information about you. So the passport is yours and remains yours, and the data is yours and remains yours. So that's great. How can governments, scientists, researchers do what they need to do if all this information is sitting on your phone? How can somebody decide whether or not you are either never been infected or already immune to let you into work or to let you onto a plane? So I want to go through some of the most common things that decision makers need to do and explain how they work so you get a sense of that. So let us suppose you're an epidemiologist, and what you're trying to do is identify infection hotspots or growth of immune communities. What you can do is you can look at the symptoms in aggregate. So we don't have any information about how John Smith was tested, but we do have information about people being tested in geographic regions, okay? And you as John Smith have given your consent to share the results. The results are completely anonymized. The most strict guidelines on de-identification, on anonymization of data, are from an organization in the US called CMS. We exceed those. So we make sure that we are sharing the data in a truly anonymous way, and epidemiologists can use that anonymized data without having to know anything about John Smith or whether or not he has antibodies. How can people use use data that never leaves your phone to do risk management and to give you guidance so that it's safe for you to return to work? What happens here is very similar to the case of somebody walking into a bar. So if I'm an employer, I can query the phone of my employees to say, is this person okay to return to work given the current protocol? And remember, the protocols can change every day. But given the current protocol, can this person return to work? Now, by US law, and I believe by UK law as well, I can't actually ask, do you have COVID? That's private medical information. And I, as an employer, it's actually illegal for me to ask that of you. Now, that hasn't stopped people from doing it because we're in panic mode right now. But eventually, case law will settle and people will realize that asking somebody if you have COVID is against the law. Certainly in the US, probably in the UK, and in other countries as well. But I can ask, are you okay to return to work given current government guidelines? Now, answering that question requires data that you're not allowed to ask. But if I answer that question on the phone and just return the green check or the red X, then I can get the information I need to make decisions without violating your civil liberties and without breaking the law, okay? Likewise, I can use a combination of querying the individual test results on the phone and the anonymized data to start making some very, very smart decisions about how to deploy my tests. So we have a supply chain. We know where the tests are. We know where the tests aren't. And because of the growth of the hotspots, we know where they need to be. So if there's supply chain shortages, this gives us the ability to be flexible and to say, there's a surplus of tests here and more tests are needed there. The next way that this can be used without violating any civil liberties or sharing data is around giving guidance. So if I'm the government, I want to be able to give guidance to people to say, you are clear to return to work, you need to stay home, you need to check your symptoms, you should go into a lab test, okay? But nobody wants to give a government a central database. So what I can do is I can send the master guidance out, and your phone, which remains in your possession, can use the data on the phone to make sure that you get the right subset of guidance. So if I send the guidance out to each phone with every possible state, the phone can use the data that's on the phone to make sure that the person using the phone receives the right guidance. So again, I can give you advice without needing to know anything about your individual status. So the last piece is the trickiest, which is this notion of contact trace. So contact trace, for those of you who haven't heard the term yet, is the ability to basically find out if somebody has COVID, who they've interacted with. So I could find out where the immunity is spread, who's got this. Very, very difficult to do this without putting in place a surveillance state. One of the reasons that China has been relatively successful in shutting down the pandemic in Wuhan as quickly as they did is because their notion of the trade-off between safety and freedom is very different than ours. It's a different set of values. So the Chinese contact trace system, which we reviewed and understand the architecture of very well, is effective because the government can mandate that you keep a record of everyone you've talked to. In many cases, the Chinese government was already doing this for political reasons. That's it's part of how they choose to run their society. So extending that surveillance capability was not a difficult stretch either intellectually or technologically for China. Well, we don't want to, or most of us anyway, don't want to implement that kind of capability in our own countries. So doing that is hard, and the uptake of contact trace solutions has been very low as a result. So we could just say, you know what, we don't like it because it implements a surveillance state. But there's an inconvenient truth, which is that it works. It's very effective in finding and tracking down and shutting down outbreaks before they exponentiate. So we felt in designing this solution that we needed to provide a level of support for contact trace when a given society, elected, to implement such a capability on behest of their government, on behest of their own leaders. We didn't feel like we wanted to play judge, jury, and executioner. So what we've done here is provide the capability to integrate with solutions that governments or enterprises chose to use without contaminating the self-sovereignty of our passport or our approach. So what we've built for contact trace is a set of integrated pipes that explain, that provide that ability for those who choose to use it, but do not mix it with the anonymized data and do not let it go anywhere near the private data that stays on the phone. So the ability to have insight and the ability to have self-sovereign data are therefore completely separate. So the insight is a portal that our organization uses, whereas the passport only stays on the app and never comes off the app. The Insight has operational data store, which is owned by the organization, but is anonymized. On the passport side, the individual owns the data. The guidance is drafted by people and sent to the passport, and the passport uses the data on the phone to make sure that people get the real, the guidance that pertains to them, and allows the organization to adjust the protocols in real time. And the Insight can be integrated with contact trace, with enterprise HR, with other platforms as required, while never touching the private data or integrating with with data that is self-sovereign. So that's the interaction. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is a component map. It will go out in the deck, and it just shows the pieces that make up the overall solution. The one thing I will talk about then is, because this is the crypto curry, I'll talk about the data strategy. So there are 3 data stores that make this work. One is the encrypted evidence cache, which stays on your phone and never leaves it. The second is the operational and analytical data store. So this is where the anonymized data that epidemiologists use is held. It's where the content management for the guidance is, and it's where the protocols are defined and redefined and refined as time goes on. And then finally, you have where blockchain fits in. And blockchain solves several problems for us. It provides an immutable ledger, which is going to be invaluable for researchers, for the anonymized data of test results. It also very neatly solves, we found, the data residency problem. If you want to start making global insights or insights that draw on data that exists in different countries around the world, where most countries have data residency requirements saying that if you're going to store data about our citizens, even if you do it anonymized, even if you don't have, you don't violate people's civil liberties, you still cannot take that data outside of my country. The US has these rules, Brazil has these rules, the UK has these rules. They're very strict in places like Indonesia and China. So blockchain provides a very, very convenient solution. We can set up individual blockchain nodes that provide the analytical insight on a global set of data, but ensure that we are obeying these residency rules in spirit as well as in letter. And the third place where blockchain is of inestimable value is in the provenance tracking. So if there's a batch of bad tests that are producing accurate results, by virtue of having an immutable ledger of the entire supply chain, we can quickly find out where every bad test in that batch is and pull it out of circulation, allowing us to resolve supply chain issues much more quickly. Could you do this without blockchain? Yes, absolutely, and people have. But because the blockchain industry has been spending the last 3-4 years solving it, this allows us to go very fast in terms of delivering a solution. Last thing I'll spend time on is a roadmap. And this just basically shows where we are with this solution. We've got a website that is that allows us to capture test results now. We made the decision early on that if it was going to take us, the actual passport is 8 weeks away, but we started this a little while ago, and we said we can't wait even the short period of time that it takes us to build this. If we've got people who want to get the test results sooner than that, we need to provide a method. So we've got what we call the rapid deployment platform that's ready now for immediate data capture of results. And this is already being deployed currently in Brazil. This is not self-sovereign. It's a central database, and it gets sunset. So it's designed so that as soon as somebody is loaded onto the Immunity Passport, their data is deleted. So it is not designed to our standards, but we needed to provide a way to capture test results in the interim. And that's live now. The Immunity Passport itself rolls out in 8 weeks. It's fully self-sovereign. We do have a way of serving users with no mobile device. And this is critical because in many places, smartphones are ubiquitous. If you look at a place like Brazil, a much higher percentage of people have smartphones in Brazil than even the US or the UK. It's over 98% of people have smartphones in the first country where people are using this. That's great, but 2% don't. And the thing about COVID is the people who are the least likely to have a smartphone are also the people who are most at risk from serious complications due to COVID, which is the elderly. So it's not good enough to say, yeah, we cover 98% of people. We need a solution, and we do have a capability of running this in a kiosk mode for people with no mobile device. Finally, since the rapid deployment site doesn't meet our principles of self-sovereignty, we need a way to get people who have been tested in these first 8 weeks off of that database and onto the fully self-sovereign solution. So if you're using the rapid deployment platform, we give you a redemption code. And as soon as the app is live, you can download the app, upload the redemption code, and your data gets deleted. The beta, which will be 4 to 6 weeks after and is already in design now, will implement the blockchain. It will support the loss or upgrade of your mobile phone, and it will support external APIs for people who want to use this data to manage things using analytical tools they may already have. Full production needs to scale to 100 million users or more, because we're talking with some very large countries that are looking to use this for their entire populations. It needs to provide the full supply chain provenance that I described, and at this point, we will be making the data available to researchers, to the scientific community, to universities, to medical groups, so that they can start using their AI and their machine learning capability to help in the fight to actually vaccinate and possibly even treat COVID better. So that I've gone a little bit later than I wanted. We still have 15 minutes left for questions. So Erica, over to you. Oh, Erica, are you there?
No, sorry, I just muted. I think I muted you accidentally for a second.
Oh, okay.
No, thank you. No, thank you very much for that. We've got a load of questions. Thank you so much. Can I crack on to questions?
Go for it.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So first of all, from Thomas Bailey, you mentioned companies taking care of their own citizens first. I don't know if this is one that you can answer, but you mentioned Sanofi announcing the US would be the first to receive a viable vaccine before the French, which is its home nation. Do you know anything about that at all?
I do know about it. Given the, so France and the US are historical allies. France was the US's first big ally during the revolution. There's a long and very close relationship. But like many familial relationships, people tend to express their love through abuse. I thought it was a very interesting decision for Sanofi to do that. I assume that whether it was, that decision was driven possibly by commercial or by relationship driven. So if Sanofi is relying on capabilities that are US based, this may be their way to get the solution live quickly. And I don't necessarily think that, that I am in a position to speak pejoratively. There might be some very good reasons to do that, but it was certainly a politically brave decision.
Cool, thank you. Next question from Catherine Balk. Are the antibody tests specific to COVID-19 or are they general to all coronaviruses?
It's a great question. Antibody tests look for antibodies by looking at a sequence of proteins that exist on the antibody. An antibody is one of the largest, most complex molecules. You don't look for the entire molecule. You find a certain piece of it and say, can I find this particular sequence of proteins? Different companies making antibody tests will choose different proteins to look for somewhere on that chain. And it's very much a crapshoot because, one thing about viruses is they mutate. You could get lucky and choose a virus or a protein sequence that stays the same through 5, 6, 7 mutations. Or, you could choose one that's very unstable and that mutates very quickly. And again, this is why medical community says, we're not going to say immune for 3 years because of that. So the antibody tests are specific to COVID-19. They may or may not be based on stable protein chains. We don't know yet. And different companies will have different chances of that. The platform, we are very much thinking about other viruses and being able to use this overall ecosystem capability. So for instance, right now, if you want to travel to more than half the countries in the world, you have to carry evidence of a yellow fever vaccination. That's currently a yellow piece of paper that's very easy to lose. We would love to be able to use this for past and for future viruses as well. So the solution would be would be a broader immunity passport, where you could keep even an immutable record of your childhood immunizations, and so forth. But these antibody tests we're talking about are specific to COVID-19.
Cool. No, thank you. David Kolb is asking that many people, particularly the most vulnerable, may be skeptical about this technology, or they may not have the resources to use it. How can you bridge this digital gap?
It's a great question, and it's something that we keep constantly in mind. So the way we're doing it is we're enabling a kiosk mode where if you are an elderly person, say in a care home or visiting a clinic, that they will have the ability to perform the tests on your behalf, and they will give you a unique identifier on a piece of paper or on an imprinted card, and that data is useless without that key which you carry. It's not the best solution, but we believe that it is the solution that will allow somebody to still retain the degree of self-sovereignty. So the 98% of people or so who have a mobile device, one of the reasons we chose to implement this the way we did is because it guards against systemic risk. And I'm particularly thinking about the systemic risk of getting hacked. There is no central database, okay? So there's no place where we can get hacked and somebody can steal the data for millions of people, okay? An individual phone can get hacked, but if you hack an individual phone, you're going to steal one person's records. You're not going to have a data breach that affects millions, okay? Storing somebody's information on a kiosk device because they don't have their own mobile phone. Now the number of records that can be hacked. So if you've got a care home with 50 people in it, somebody could potentially hack those 50 records. So it's not perfect, but we think it is the best compromise that makes sure that the full capabilities of this ecosystem are available even to people without mobile devices.
Cool, thank you. Linda is asking what about identical twins? How do you test their identity? I like that question.
It's an awesome question, and I would expect that of Linda. The attestation is done by a human being, so it is possible that two identical twins could swap their passport, and each end up with a passport with the other's identity. We don't believe it's worth compromising the self-sovereignty of the data to put in place the kind of biometric validation that would be required to prevent that from happening. Mm-hmm. That being said, the incidence of or the likelihood of abuse is in a case like that is vanishingly small, and there would have to be collusion on the part of both twins to do that swap. So it is, the protection is no better than an identical twin impersonating their sibling to get on an airplane and flash their passport at the check-in counter. They could do that now, and they could do that to spoof this. So we haven't made it any better, but we also don't believe we've made it any worse.
Okay, thank you. Mark Simpson is saying he loves the solution. About the attestation, is this restricted movement? Is it necessary to be physically go to a notary, or could you live stream to prove who you are? And
another fantastic question, and this one has kept me up more nights than one.
Okay.
I would love to be able to have us support attestation over Zoom, for instance. And perhaps we will come across a solution that allows us to do so by the time we reach full production. The reason we haven't elected to do that now is this notion of systemic risk. Right now, there is no systemic risk. There's no database. There's no way somebody could breach millions of records. The moment I set up, even an encrypted pipe in Zoom, where somebody could potentially hack into my video stream, I think we could be pretty clever about keeping that secure. And I think even if somebody could tap into the video stream, they would then have to figure out some kind of OCR to pull the data off the passport, because all they would be doing is flashing their passport. But even then, it's compromising what at this point is a very, very pure self-sovereignty solution. And I'm not going to recommend that we take that extra step until we have something that we are 100% confident doesn't introduce systemic risk into our solution. Would I like to get there? Yes. Do I have some ideas? Yes. Are there any I'm comfortable enough to endorse yet? No. And Mark or anyone else, if you think you have the answer, by all means, get in touch.
Cool, thank you. Linda is also asking, is there any type of backup of the data on your phone, such as the daily backup of things to iCloud, for example? And if not, what happens if you lose your phone? Is it safe?
The answer is I'm not sure yet. I mean, so one very easy way that we can solve the how do you transfer your passport if you lose your phone or if you upgrade to a newer phone is to use the native backup capability in both iOS and Android to move your passport across. Before we sign on the dotted line and say this is how we're going to do it, we want to understand the full security implications of doing that. So right now, the default, until at least for the live trial for this first stage, is to say, since we only want the live trial to be the first 8 weeks, and then we'll go to the beta and then production. For now, we'd say, what, it's better to say if you lose your phone, go get retested for a short period of time. We will eventually, by the time we go into production, have to support a lost or upgrade phone, or it's not a sustainable solution. But before we back a horse and say phone backup is the way we're going to do it, we might decide to go down a guardianship where you empower a trusted member of your family. I mean, there's 5 or 6 different ways of solving this within the self-sovereignty community, and we're not ready to back a horse just yet. That is certainly one of the most elegant ways. We just want to make sure it's secure enough.
Cool. No, thank you. Robin Fairless is asking, how granular is a user location that is sent out?
So what we're using there is, first of all, no location is sent out unless the user gives consent. So you can get tested and decline to have your location sent out. So that's the first answer. The system that we are using for geolocation is a solution called What 3 Words, which is a very clever bunch of people who have tiled the entire Earth into 3-meter squares and given each of those 3-meter squares an address that consists of 3 common English words. My home address, which I actually use on my business card, is belong, enjoyable, delay. That is my What 3 Words address. This is already being used in the as the postal code for some 6 or 7 countries in the world that don't have reliable postcodes. To give an example of where What 3 Words has been particularly successful, it's in Mongolia, which still has a very, very large nomadic population that will move around seasonally to different places and have no fixed address. The Mongolian steppe is beautiful, and you can see why even today a nomadic lifestyle still makes sense. So by virtue of the fact that you can now use What 3 Words address as your postcode, this means that Mongolians can now have Amazon. So it's game changing. Or in Côte d'Ivoire, where you have villages that are not accessible by streets, it makes a huge difference. So we're using that because, again, we don't want to try anything new, and this has a pattern of success.
Cool. No, thank you. Mark Simpson is asking if you're speaking to the UK government, and it feels a lot more robust than the proposed solutions that are being built and procured. So take that as a compliment, I'm sure.
I can't go into too much detail about this, Mark, but let me answer both of your questions. Are you speaking to the UK government? Yes. This feels more robust. We agree.
Cool. Thank you. Richard is saying great presentation and fascinating work. Thank you. But he's isn't sure if he's missed something, but his understanding is that the immunity passport is most likely to be adopted by one or multiple organizations. That if you're not expecting or requiring wider adoption, such as nationwide by a government or health authority, and if this is correct, what limitations does that present for the viability of some of the broader applications you implied, such as getting into a bar or boarding a plane? And will the immunity passport carry sufficient credibility or recognition if it is only adopted by a few organizations? And if he's incorrect and you are pushing this for nationwide adoption, what are the risks for a government in partnering with a new company such as Blok Bioscience? And he apologized for the long question.
First of all, Richard, no apologies, because these are awesome challenges and things we're thinking about. If I can answer by way of an analogy, one of the design thinking patterns that that I've used for adoption is mobile money, and I've taken a look at the two countries in the world where the number of mobile money transactions is now higher than the number of cash transactions. That's happened in two places, and I happen to have lived in both of those places, and that's Kenya and China. And in both of those cases, the adoption was driven not by the consumers, but by the merchants. What made mobile money ubiquitous, both in Kenya and China, was that every small merchant accepted it. Because in Kenya, it was because the small merchants wouldn't get robbed. Thieves in Kenya roam around in armed gangs of 12 or more people. They are no joke, and carrying cash is exceedingly dangerous. This gave a shop owner a way of not being put into a life-threatening situation on a regular basis. So it was a very easy step for a shop owner in Kenya to say, look, just text me your money with M-Pesa, and that way I don't have to have any cash. In China, it was more, it was more commerce-driven. Because the banks are still state-owned, there is no commercial banking as we understand it in China. So small businesses didn't have the kind of cash management services that merchants in the UK or the US take for granted. And the growth of Alipay was driven because of that. But in both cases, it was the merchant networks that really caused the adoption to go viral. We believe it's going to be the same here. So absolutely, we're looking at a solution that provides small businesses the capability to use these assertion checks to let people into hotels and bars, and that's very much in our mind. We need larger enterprises, quite frankly, to fund our development. We need to sell to some big clients and indeed to some national governments to have the money to build out the rest of our solution. We would much rather do that than go the venture capital right. So far, that appears to be working well for us, and we're very optimistic that that our financing approach was the right one. So yes, we will do that by providing the larger enterprises the kind of analytic capability they need to get a workforce of 100,000 employees or more back to work. But what they're funding is something that an owner of a bar in Brazil, and which we're using as a use case because it's an actual thing that we're doing in Brazil right now. Who has 5 employees in that bar can use this to let people into the bar. So the commercial model is very much along those lines. The idea is basically the passport costs $1 for a year. The agent app costs $1. We want to make this something that is affordable for everyone. The analytical capabilities that large enterprises need, well, those are going to cost more. But the fundamental idea is $1, a pound, a euro, whatever your unit of currency is. It's going to be at an affordable level for even the poorest of people, because that's the only way we can do our job We think that the level of gouging we're seeing sickens us, and we want no part of it. The commercial model is driven to make this affordable, or even in fact in some places free. And it's very much along the lines of, we believe that our success in getting this out there and getting it used is by getting small merchants to adopt it.
Cool. No, thank you. Robin Fairless is asking that if in the age of the gig economy, can a user be part of multiple organizations?
Yes, they can. The passport is singular. So you have a passport. So if you are an employee of Deutsche Telekom and you take a flight on Emirates, for instance, not picking those companies at random, you can use that data. Larger enterprises like these are very jealous of their brand and want an integrated user experience. So Emirates, for instance, famously does not let anybody, so all of the experience that you need to do with Emirates is handled via one single Emirates app. So what we will do to provide these very large and brand sensitive organizations the capabilities they want is the ability to integrate with our app on the phone. In other words, again, they will not be able to query any of the personal identifiable information, even on the phone, but they will be able to interact with the app to answer the questions that they are legally allowed to answer to do the job. So for instance, if you're traveling and you want to say, should I let this person on the plane, you can give the user of the Emirates app that advice in the Emirates app. Say, you are clear to travel, you are not clear to travel. But the lookup will be done on a single immunity passport, which the other branded apps would query.
Cool, thank you. John Stoddart is saying that he's been working on something similar, but using financial services KYC video onboarding tech, and then using hash encrypted QR. So encrypted QR code is used alongside with facial image and voice to ensure that they've got the correct individual. And that linking with laboratory admin systems is important too. How do you see that happening, and who will actually purchase the system?
It's another great question, and obviously it's something that we've thought of. The self-sovereignty, industry and the state of the art is really in its nascency. There are several competing standards, and a lot of them are actually brilliant in my mind, and really, really thoughtful. I couldn't place a bet on which one will achieve predominance. So we've elected to design a solution that can eventually support or be certifiable in any of these schemes. Once we place a bet on biometrics or on, again, how we support lost phone, we constrain ourselves. We will have to place those bets. I am guessing that eventually we will need to support some form of biometric validation. I don't feel yet qualified to have an opinion on which one to choose or on how to do it. Again, not to say I don't have ideas. I have some pretty clear ideas, but I want to make sure that it's right before we place that bet.
Cool. No, thank you. David Kolb is asking, what is your view on the viability of a global immunity passport?
Our view is that it's eminently achievable, and we'd like to be the ones to do it.
Cool, short and sweet, thank you. Kyle is asking, what level of investor or institutional support would move this to get where you need it to go?
Our strong preference is to get the funding through doing business rather than by equity fundraising. We believe that is a sustainable model, and we believe that we think it's a great business because we can offer this capability at a price that is not gouging, at $1 a year per person, and the cost of building it is noise in comparison. What makes this work is adoption. If we can get this adopted rapidly, it is a hugely viable business model and not one we need to seek equity investment for. So that's our focus.
Cool, thank you. Somebody is asking, what is the underlying tech that will be leveraged with the immunity passport?
Well, so I've given some of that that information. I'm not going to divulge all of it. I'm not going to give away our secret sauce. Blockchain plays a key role. We are not a zero knowledge proof solution using the technical and academic definition of what a zero knowledge proof is. We're not doing the the stochastic modeling around zero knowledge proof, but we're clearly using zero knowledge proof principles to say you can answer a question without having to know the reasons and get a tested answer that you can trust. Clearly, we're going to be employing machine learning in our analytic capability. We are employing end-to-end encryption even for the anonymized data. We are employing compliance solutions to make sure that we're GDPR compliant, to make sure that we're HIPAA compliant, and CMS compliant. We're employing a mix of technologies to ensure. But as I said, we're not actually doing anything new, and that's a conscious decision because we need to go fast. You can go new or you can go fast. In my experience, you're not that successful if you try to do both at the same time.
Cool, thank you. Mark is asking how one can protect data sovereignty with quantum computing coming online, and you've mentioned phones being hacked.
So again, prior to starting this, my firm FinServe Experts was actually developing capability in quantum resilience. So this is something that I could do an entire 1 hour curry on. These are some really, really Teflon coated ideas. Even with a degree in applied maths, it's hard for me to understand. But the short answer is we can't. So again, what we've opted to do here is to solve the quantum resilience problem by saying, there is no target to be hacked. Could you use quantum methods to hack a phone? Yeah, easily. You will get one person's data, or at worst, 50 people's data for a device in kiosk mode. What we're trying to avoid, and this is why we're not doing attestation over Zoom, for instance. What we're trying to avoid is that whether it's quantum or some other method, if somebody breaches us, there's nothing for them to get.
Cool, thank you. Chris Justice is asking if this immunity passport can be used one day for access to a pub or movie theatre or a cinema for us English folks, or a concert, or how do you assess immunity or the right to go to the pub or theatre or a concert for the 80 to 95% of people who have not had the virus and do not have antibodies?
So again, it's a great question, and it's an early use case. It's not we'll do that someday. It's we'll do that very soon, likely first in Brazil and likely this this summer. So that's early on the roadmap, not later. And you do it by making it almost as easy to be an agent, using our parlance, as it is to be a member. So if you run a pub or a restaurant or a hotel, you can use this to check people when they enter, and the decision or the basis of that decision will change. As I said, the protocols are changing all the time. But one thing that's clear: there is a protocol, in pretty much every country right now on how to let somebody in or give somebody access when they test entirely negative, have never had never had any symptoms, never had the antibodies, could be at risk of infection, so given that even in the worst places in the world, we're talking about 5% of the country, you need a protocol that supports the other 95%. So what we have to do right now is to make sure our platform is flexible enough to allow people to construct protocols and to change those protocols on a regular basis. So far, all the protocols we've seen address what to do about the 95% and the conditions under which you let them into a bar. So as long as we keep up to date with those protocols, the pub owner and the restaurant owner will be able to use our solution to let somebody in.
Cool. No, thank you. Somebody is asking if you've considered custodianship and guardianship, such as several people in a family sharing one phone, like a child, for example.
Yes, we have. Short answer. And as I said, we're looking at several of the ways that we can make compromise on the a self-sovereignty compromise to support a lost or upgrade phone. Guardianship is one of the things that we've looked at as a solution to that. and again for use of shared devices. The multi-factor authentication for going into a pub or a bar is the phone plus a selfie. So the selfie won't work if it's on somebody else's phone, because we have we'll be able to say the selfie is was taken by this phone, and if you just you send that selfie to someone else, it won't work on their phone. So a family won't be able to use a single phone with 4 different selfies on it. And, the attestation doesn't work that way. Could we in the future support a guardianship model with shared devices? Yes, we could do that. Could we use a guardianship model as a way of as one of several possible methods for a lost or upgraded phone? Yes, we could. So we haven't placed a firm bet on that. We want to understand the guardianship scenarios better and the risks they propose before we put that stake in the ground.
Fred Parker-Hobbs is asking, what is the competitive landscape for this technology? If multiple solutions emerge, do you expect interoperability?
Everybody and their brother is in. The number of solutions that are out there are proliferating. Respondents to some of the RFPs in the UK have numbered in the thousands. So the competition is here. We think we have several notable differentiators. One is that we are not just a software company. We have an established supply chain that almost nobody can touch. So we can not only provide the platform, we can provide the tests. That's key. We believe that that most of our competitors have made compromises in self-sovereignty that we're not willing to make. We think that's key to drive adoption. The contact trace solution in Singapore, notably, has failed in adoption, even in a country where following the rules and following the government is a cultural norm, which, again, I've lived in Singapore and it is a cultural norm. But even there, people are not going for the solution because it isn't self-sovereign. So, there are other differentiators which, I'm not so keen on discussing in a public forum. But the competitive landscape is already fierce. It's going to get worse. Everybody sees this as an opportunity to make money. But I think the access we have, the fact that we have a supply chain, the fairly pure nature of our self-sovereignty, and to be honest, our pricing model, of $1 per person, puts us in a very, very good place.
Cool. No, thank you. Somebody is saying great analysis and presentation, so thank you for that. Would the production stage of the immunity passport play nice with other passport schemes that would undoubtedly emerge? I'm guessing that's the same, similar sort of.
Well, so up to a point, we've already recognized the need to support in a limited way contact trace. We don't want to be enablers of a surveillance state, and we will not touch contact trace data ourselves. But we do believe that as I said, the only way to fight this with is an ecosystem, and there is indisputable empirical evidence that contact trace is a viable part of that ecosystem. So we will provide, as I said, the principle that I'm using, I'm calling insulated pipes. We will provide the integration capability without ever touching that data, and we will have independent authorities audit us to make sure that it's not just us saying so. The other place where we will directly cooperate is the one I already described. When we're working with governments or enterprises who want to include the capability of the passport within their integrated user experience, we will do that in a model so long as those companies and the apps being put forward by those companies and those governments query the data on the phone using questions they're legally entitled to ask that don't compromise self-sovereignty.
Cool. No, thank you. Richard is just asking very quickly where you got your lapel pin from. I'm guessing it's a UN SDGs one from.
That's right. This is the color wedges on here represent the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which for those of you who know me from my FinServ Experts days, we were very, very key players in financial inclusion and recycling and sustainable circular economies. So we're very passionate about the UN SDGs, and they make a difference. And the financial inclusion work that I've done to date is the thing that I'm proudest of in my career. So absolutely thrilled to wear this. Where I got it, you actually go to there's an online store in the UN where you can buy the pin.
Cool. I'm sure you'll share the link with us to email out to everyone later.
Sure.
Olga is saying that there have been some data published recently that several countries have conducted antibody testing on a sizable population sample, but that the percentage of positive results has been fairly small, albeit tests haven't been 100% accurate. Given that tests are more or less accurate and reliable, does this imply that either immunity was not developed or that individuals have not had the virus? And can passporting lead to some discrimination or privileging based on not having or having immunity?
The short answer is yes, it can, and it worries us a lot. There's another social outcome that worries us even more, which is people having COVID parties and intentionally contracting the disease so they can get the antibody and go back to work. We've actually retained a behavioral economist on our staff to help us map those very, very turbulent waters. So I think this is a really valid concern, and it's something that we have to be very careful. I think the answer is twofold, but it revolves primarily around the guidance you give to people. Okay, if the only way to get back to work is to have the confirmed immunity and a passport that says so, you're going to get some very, very risky and behaviors that are going to put society more at risk. So the answer is in defining protocols that provide a path to getting back to work and making a living for people who don't have the virus. So as a technologist, I just have to provide a platform that provides the flexibility to support those protocols. As an influencer of policymakers, we have to not just provide a piece of technical kit, but we have to advise people to say, no, you don't want to write the protocol that way. We've got a platform that supports it if you do, but what you have to do is you have to write a protocol that doesn't encourage behavior that puts people more at risk.
Cool. No, thank you. Your son is asking how will the app change with the definition of immunity? So I'm guessing you're going to have an interesting conversation at dinner.
So ultimately, in the longer term, there's going to be a vaccine here. And the app is already being designed to support a vaccination as part of your immunity record, and indeed to go beyond vaccination for COVID, but vaccination for yellow fever or the MMR vaccination that that most people in most part of the kids in the world get today. Polio, I mean, what a tragedy. We had a disease that was almost eradicated, but is now reemerging because some countries are choosing not to pay for vaccinations, and because of outbreaks of an even worse disease, COVID, called idiocy, in certain parts of the U.S. where they actually are choosing not to vaccinate for polio. So yes, we are absolutely thinking about the long-term impacts and the role that we can play in taking the fight to the next stage. For some musing on the long-term social impact of COVID that is probably higher quality than my own, I would strongly advise people to read a LinkedIn post that Bill Gates wrote about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, that where he predicts what the long-term impact is going to be on society due to COVID. Predicting the future is chancy at best. I can say from personal experience that I suck at it. Bill Gates has a better record than most, both as a commercial leader of a major organization and then as a leader of the world's largest philanthropic foundation. He's gotten things right way more often than most people do, including the world's inability to cope with a major pandemic. So very, very highly recommended reading to further understand the impact of COVID on society.
Robin is also saying that currently drivers have half a dozen various pay and display parking apps on their phones. as different car parks use different parking apps? And is there a risk that something similar might happen with amenity passport?
Yes.
Every establishment wants a different one.
Yeah. So again, the risk of fragmentation is a very real risk. If you want to look at a horrible warning or place where it's gone very wrong, look at mobile money in Indonesia, where there are over 60 different payment apps, none of which have critical mass, where merchants have to have whole banks of point of sale devices to make a living. So again, this is something that is very, very very much on our radar. What our view is, again, is we want to drive adoption by making this extremely inexpensive to use, by providing a set of capabilities that even the owner of a small bar or restaurant has no problem deploying, and by getting it out there as these timelines that you see on the roadmap. They aren't the normal amount of time you would want to do it. You would want to do this in, and getting it out there quickly, I think, is the best way we can avoid that kind of fragmentation.
Cool. No, thank you. Olga is asking if there's any consideration for kids passporting, since they're only likely to have a phone when reaching a certain age, or are they out of scope being in a low risk population?
So obviously we are considering. So in many cases, the age at which kids get phones is getting younger and younger, and that's and it's far younger in Brazil than it is in the UK, for instance. But nevertheless, and there was another question about guardianship. We are looking at that. I'm not going to tell you we have an answer for it yet, but it is something that by the time we get into full production, we absolutely need to support.
All right, cool. Okay, thank you. Fred Falco-Hobbs is saying, thanks for your answer. And if you've got a view or solution for interoperability in the event that another successful solution emerges, you've already mentioned that a bit, but I guess the question is, would you be willing to partner?
So do I have a view or solution? Yes, I do. I'm not interested in sharing it at the moment.
Fair. And somebody is saying that, what about the agent that testifies or validates a member that's onboarding info or validating the ID, and who's accountable for them?
No, and this is an important thing. And again, we've tried to design a model for interaction that's elegant. So one of the things that, so if you are drawing blood, for instance, or evaluating a test, you have to be qualified to do that. So currently, in many countries, the people who are allowed to draw blood, you have to be a doctor, a registered nurse, or a phlebotomist, okay? If you are running one of these very sophisticated CLIA or ELISA assay machines, okay, you have to be a qualified lab tech, and you have to be trained on that specific machine in that specific assay on that machine. So we are using the same attestation capability to do that. So a doctor who wanted to sign up as an agent who had a qualification to draw blood would get their medical qualification attested in the same way that a member got their passport attested, following a very similar process, using the same capability, using the same self-sovereignty. So the platform will support the attestation of agents with specific qualifications, as well as just general agents. So we're using, we're eating our own dog food and using our same attestation engine to onboard the agents as well as the members.
Cool. No, well, that's the end of the questions now, and I'm conscious we've taken up an hour and a half of your and Laura's time. So thank you so very much, Ariel. That's been amazing. I've learned a lot, got a lot of notes. A few people have asked if you'd be willing to share the slides.
Yes.
Perfect. So if you can send them to me, then I will email out tomorrow the recording link of this and the slides. In the meantime, Ariel, thank you so very much for all of that and for answering all of those questions, and to everyone who asked all of the questions. We'll let you get back to your evenings. Now, one favor / requests from me: if anyone has enjoyed this or found value in this, if anyone would be willing to share praise and lots of superlatives about this webinar or any of the other Crypto Carry webinars on LinkedIn or any other social media, or with anybody that you know, we'd be hugely grateful. It really does help spread awareness of them and helps us get some great speakers and attendees as well. So if anyone would be willing to spread word about this on LinkedIn or social media, I'd be so grateful. But in the meantime, Ariel, thank you very, very much. And thanks again to everyone who's asked questions. And there's been a couple more people just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. So yeah, well, I'll send an email out with all of those links tomorrow. And I'm sure Ariel will be happy to answer more questions in due course.
Well, thanks back at you, Erica, for first of all, organizing it so efficiently and making it so seamless. But thank you even more just for giving me the opportunity to share. I'm hugely grateful.
No, and thank you. And just a huge thanks. I know Laura's listening in the background, but she's Laura from Babel Quest, the HubSpot team, has been hugely helpful in basically doing everything tech-wise for these webinars. And she's given up her evening as well to help out on this. So very grateful to Laura.
Yeah, and Erica, can I ask in return, you send me a transcript of the questions?
Oh, I don't know if that's possible. Laura?
Yeah, I think I can pull them out.
Okay, if you could, thank you. Do I need to do anything for that, or?
No, you don't need to do anything.
Cool, yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
No
Excellent.
problem.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.